I'd like to start this morning with a little exercise, if you will. Take your hands and just kind of hold them like this, out in front of you, maybe a little lower, not too high up. Now, whether or not there's somebody directly behind you, turn around and look at the person or the space directly behind you. All right, that's good. Now, where did your hands go? Did they stay there or did they go with you? They went with you. I learned this recently. Our oldest is nearing on getting his driver's license. And as we took a defensive driving class, the instructor was a professional driver who trains like a whole fleet of drivers in safety. And he told us something that was news to me, and that is, if you set your mirrors just right, you don't have a blind spot and you don't have to look over your shoulder. And he said this was important because your head leads the way and your body tends to follow. So most of us maybe have learned to hold our hands still and look a little bit over our shoulder, but sooner or later those hands are going to follow your head because our head generally leads the way for our body. I learned this in every sport I've ever played. There was always some instruction from the coach about where your head is supposed to be relative to the ball or the other person because your body follows your head. I've been playing golf since I was a little kid. I haven't played in a long time, but when I was little, we never took lessons. We just went and hacked around on the course with our grandparents. So when I was in college, a buddy of mine we were out playing, and it seemed like though the flag was out there, our ball never went right towards the flag. Sometimes you'd slice it or hook it, but sometimes I would hit it really straight, just not right at the flag. And that day we were playing, as we were getting ready at the first hole, the marshal said, "Hey, can this guy play along with you?" And this older guy, and we said, "Sure." So we're going along, and midway through he goes, "What are you all aiming at?" And I said, "Well, we're aiming at the flag." And he said, "That's what you think you're aiming at." But the problem was your body follows your head, right? And so we would look and try to think way out there. And when you're far away from something, if you get off by just a little bit, by the time you get there, you're off by a lot, right? Because the angle here, it grows apart. And what we didn't realize is that we weren't really aiming at what we thought we were aiming at because our head was just a little bit off, so our whole body would get off. And even if we hit it straight, we didn't hit it right at the flag that we were aiming at. Now, our bodies follow our heads, and in that case, our physical action then follows our head and our body. But it's also true that our minds tend to lead the way for our actions. In those very same sports, a coach can always look at someone and say, you need to get your head in the game, which means your mind is not focused. You think of the little kid playing t-ball that's picking flowers in the outfield or picking up rocks in the infield. Their head is not in the game, right? They are not focused. And so there's this also sense that our minds can lead the way for our actions. And I think Paul understands this because in the midst of this stretch of the 8th chapter of Romans, Paul tells us that those who live in the flesh focus their minds on things in the flesh, and those who live by the Spirit focus their minds on things of the Spirit. Now, I thought Paul had this backwards, because that seems to imply that if you're a person that kind of lives of the worldly things, of our wants and our desires, that then your mind ends up there. And I want to tell Paul, no, where you put your mind, then that ends up being where your body is. And I want to tell Paul that because in observing human culture and human people, I have seen this all over the place. That where we put our minds tends to be where our actions go. Some of you may have known someone like this guy that I know who always has a scheme. He's always got a new proposition, some new thing that he's spinning up, and once he gets it going, that's going to be the thing that takes off and makes him wealthy. It's because his mind was always on being wealthy. It's like, if I could just find the right thing, the right gadget, the right program, the right process, and then I can spin it into a business, and then I will be wealthy. His mind is there, so that's where it takes his action, which has meant for him in a lot of ways he bounces around from thing to thing and doesn't really have any stability because he's always chasing that thing that his mind is chasing. Some of you maybe know someone whose marriage isn't going well. And maybe it's the husband, maybe it's the wife. They pull into the garage every day to work, and then they think, well, here it goes. As soon as I walk in the house, the fight's going to be there. The mind was already there. Is that more likely that the fight's going to happen? Probably. Sometimes it's with our own children or our parents. We live in these places where if we have our mind in a space, it tends to be a self-fulfilling kind of thing, that's where our actions take us. Now, I'm not suggesting simply that if we have a positive attitude that fixes all of our problems. But if you wake up every day and think, well, here comes another terrible day, odds are you're probably going to have kind of a bad day because you already decided you were going to, and that's where you put your mind. But it also can impact us when we get out into the world around us. I've read stories and heard interviews with people who justify their carrying of a gun, and they'll say, well, there was this time that I had to have it, and because I had it, it diffused the situation. And one of the people that I read about, that 4 times they said that having their gun on them helped them diffuse the situation that they had at hand. Now, I personally, in all of my 43 years, have never had a situation where I thought, boy, if I just had a gun, this would have gone better. So I suspect that in some of those cases, the fact that they have a gun changes the way that they're thinking, right? They've got their mind on the world being a scary place that you can defend yourself from, and so some kind of human action starts to happen, and then they're like, oh, it's a good thing I have the gun. Here I am now ready to jump into this situation, because their mind is there that takes their action there. This is what happens to Peter when they're in the garden, and Jesus is about to get arrested. Peter has decided to bring a sword along, so his mind is all ready. In none of the rest of the stories of the gospel do you hear about them carrying swords. And his mind was already there that something bad is going to happen, and as soon as it happens, he jumps to it and whacks the guy in the head and takes his ear off, and then Jesus says, no, that's not where we're going. Jesus' mind is in a different place, so he has different actions. Peter's mind is someplace else. Now, if you look at us as a culture right now, we have a very polarized culture. We have people on basically 2 sides, and a lot of that comes down to where we put our minds. We can call it an echo chamber of just paying attention to the people that agree with you. Sometimes you call it a confirmation bias, where the only news you believe is the news that tells you what you already believe. But we end up in these places where we have basically 2 factions in our country that pay attention to one narrative and not the other narrative, and so we can't come together and make and come to solutions for the big complicated issues that we all share. Now that single-mindedness that we have grows out of a place. It grows out of a place of our own fears and our own frustrations and our own worries. Sometimes those may be economic worries. Sometimes they may be that the culture is changing around us and we don't adjust to it, and so we're concerned about where it's headed. Sometimes those worries are our own physical health or our place where we live. Whatever they are, we end up with those worries and concerns, and when we get anxious, we lose the ability to be creative and solve problems, and we want quick fixes that get rid of that anxiety that we have. And so the easiest way that we see quick fixes is to pay attention to voices that tell us what we want to hear and tell us that they're going to solve our problems quickly. And that's what you end up with on both sides of our polarization. Now, in the history of the United States, I would guess that our best work has always come when all of the people on both sides have come together and figured out what the solution is in between. I've said this before, if liberal policies were the exact right answer to everything we had, we would never have a conservative government, because we would say, oh look, the liberals have all the benefits. And on the other side, if conservative policies were the only thing that worked, we would never have liberals that govern anything. The reality is it's always been someplace in the middle, that there's been compromise and deep thinking and thoughtfulness. But when we get afraid and anxious for our own selves and lose sight of other people around us, it's easy to put our minds into those places of single-minded paying attention to just one thing, and then we lose track of that community that is able to solve problems and is able to live into a different future. So whether it's standing in the garage worried about how we're going to interact with our spouse, whether it's just being afraid to go outside, whether it is scheming to some way of wealth, or whether it's just a collective way we live together, it is very easy for us to put our minds out there in things that are focused on what Paul calls the flesh, what I would call our own desires and wishes and fears and anxieties. And that's why I want to put that first and say when we put our minds in those places of the flesh, that's where our bodies end up. That's where our action ends up. That's where we end up walking. But that's not the order that Paul puts it in. Paul says the people who walk with the flesh set their minds in the flesh, and the people who walk in the Spirit set their minds in the Spirit. And if you want to understand why he puts it in that order, you have to keep reading. Because then he tells us that Jesus came to do what we could not do and what the law could not do. Jesus came to take on sin and death. And we can define sin lots of ways, but today if we think of sin as the ways that we separate ourselves from God and separate ourselves from one another. It's easy to see how getting our mind on things of the flesh can create broken relationships in our humanity. And we could not fix that. So Jesus came to do that. And in doing that, Jesus, Paul tells us, gives us a gift of life and makes us people of the Spirit. He says it very directly, you are not of the flesh, you are of the Spirit. And if we are of the Spirit, then, Paul seems to be telling us, we can put our minds on things of the Spirit, versus if we were of the flesh, we could only put our minds on things of the flesh. And this is where I love Lutheran theology, and that it lands us in this little kind of paradoxical place. On the one hand, what Paul is telling us is that there's nothing we can do to bring ourselves to God. There's nothing we can do to fix ourselves, that Jesus had to do that. And that Jesus has done that, and has made us people of the Spirit, and empowered us to go out into the world and be those people of the Spirit. But on the other hand, Paul is also telling us that there are things we can do to put our minds and focus on things. There are places where we can put our attention that can change the environment around us a bit. It doesn't mean it makes us right with God. It doesn't mean it makes us people of the Spirit. Jesus has already done that. What Paul is saying is that because Jesus has already made us people of the Spirit, we can now put our minds and focus in different ways than we might have otherwise. And we've already started to do that. We're gathered here today for about an hour. And what will we be focused on for that hour? God, Jesus, right? The glory of God. We're going to sing, we're going to pray, we're going to share in a meal together that is a gift of grace that we didn't have to do anything to earn. We're gathered around these waters where we talk about forgiveness and mercy. All of that is a place where our minds are now focused on things of the Spirit. When we get out into our week, there are things we can do to focus on the stuff of Spirit. We can read Scripture. We can pray. We don't have to do this every day, all day long, right? But just little bits of it can shape us. I'm mindful of when you see a hero on the news that did something like heroic, like they dragged somebody out of a pond or they run into a burning building. And whenever they ask them why they did it, what do they say? I just did it, right? They didn't sit down in that moment and go, well, let's see. That car just went into the pond. There's a person in there. Probably the right thing to do would be to go jump. Well, maybe not. Do I have to? They just go do it, right? When our minds are focused in the places of the Spirit, we just respond. We respond with generosity. We respond with grace. We respond with forgiveness. And it is important then that we keep our minds focused to condition us to do that. As we think about the stories of Scripture, this is why I think the stories of Scripture are so important. Is David a good guy or a bad guy in the narrative of Scripture? Both. On the one hand, he is the king who is told that his reign will last forever. And then on the other hand, he literally covets another man's wife, like the things of the flesh, very literally, and then has the guy killed. He can do some terrible, awful things, and yet he is the ultimate king that is lifted up as an example. It's a reminder to us that we cannot always keep our minds on the Spirit, that we don't always get it right, but God can still use us to do good in the world. God can still use us to serve the world. You get into stories of the New Testament. Often I've had conversations with people who will look at people that are begging and just say, oh, well, they're probably going to drink it away, or who knows what they're going to waste it on. We've already decided in our minds that they are lazy and wasteful, though we don't know anything about that person. And when the story of the Good Samaritan comes along then and says, hey, this guy gets beat up and left in a ditch, and the most faithful people in the community walk right on by, and the foreigner comes and helps him and serves him. We hear a story like that, and it shapes us, because we then maybe can say, oh, maybe this person isn't just wasteful and lazy, and I should stop a moment and get to know their story and help them along. And you can go on and on through the stories of Scripture that when we hear these stories and they take our focus and we put our minds in those places, it can then shape how we go out into the world. Now again, we don't do this all on our own. Jesus has already made us people of the Spirit, which is what allows us to live in that space. If I go back to that day on the golf course, we were trying to aim at the flag way out there, and he said, that's not what I do. We said, well, what do you do? Because he was hitting the ball very straight. He said, I look at the flag and the ball, and I find something just a few feet in front of me that is on that same line. Might be a leaf, might be a discolored patch of grass or a weed, whatever it is. And he said, and it's much easier to get your head lined up and your body lined up with that spot right in front of you. And sure enough, he taught us how to do that, and we didn't hit them all straight, but some of them actually went where we were aiming. And I think about Jesus in this way. Paul tells us that he gives us this gift of life for our mortal bodies, meaning this gift of life is not just for later. But if Jesus is able to look through the cross and have that long view of resurrection life that is coming. Jesus is able to keep his mind focused there. He's able to take on people that verbally abuse him and physically abuse him and put him on the cross because he knows where he is going and he can see all the way past that cross to resurrection. We can't always do that. If I were to lay out for you, or if anyone could lay out for any of us the things that would come before us in life, it would be overwhelming to try to see past all of that and keep our minds focused on things of the Spirit. We couldn't do it. But we can focus on the stuff that's right in front of us. We can focus on worship and prayer and Scripture. We can focus on the people we encounter each and every day that are in need and just do that little bit for that moment. And when we do that little bit for that moment, that spirited person in us is coming out and shaping the world around us each step that we take. We don't have to keep our eyes on resurrection. That gift is already ours. Jesus has blessed us to be people of the Spirit who can just take in that word, do the best we can to focus our minds, and trust that through us God will transform the world each and every day. Amen.